There is this very specific, unmistakable sound that happens right before disaster strikes, like crack, snap, crash.
Oh, it is terrifying.
Right. Imagine waking up to that in the middle of a brutal windstorm and realizing a 60-foot eucalyptus tree is just giving way right outside your living room window.
Yeah, you really don't have time to panic or, move your car.
Exactly. Gravity is already taking over. Welcome to today's deep dive. We're spending this time going through a stack of incredibly detailed guides written by John Constantine of Monte Tree Service.
Published back in the spring of 2026.
Yeah, and our mission today is to give you the ultimate shortcut to understanding tree hazards. We want to arm you with the knowledge to just walk out into your yard, spot the warning sign.
Like a subtle lean or maybe some exposed roots.
Right, and understand exactly how to manage those threats long before the tree actually begins to fall.
Because, mature landscaping is a wonderful thing. It provides vital shade, improves air quality, and adds real estate value to your property. But that value comes with a massive ongoing responsibility.
It really does.
You are essentially managing a multi-ton biological structure that's just suspended over your house.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because I always assumed you just plant a tree, water it occasionally, and nature does the rest.
That's a super common misconception.
Right. But before we get into spotting the hazards, we really need to understand the environment these trees are fighting against. The materials focus heavily on El Monte, California, and the broader San Gabriel Valley.
Yes.
So what is it about this specific area that puts trees under so much stress?
Well, it basically boils down to this phenomenon the guides describe as weather whiplash.
Weather whiplash.
Right. Trees in this region are subjected to extreme shifts in weather that, over time, systematically degrade their structural anchors. Like, it starts with the prolonged, bone-dry California summers.
So, the drought literally weakens them.
Significantly. During a really long drought, a tree's root system becomes desperate for moisture, so the roots actually physically shrink.
Wow, wait. They physically shrink.
Yeah, they lose those tiny microscopic root hairs that normally grip the surrounding dirt. And the soil itself dries out, contracting and pulling away from the root system.
Okay, so the roots are basically losing their firm grasp on the earth.
Exactly. And then the second half of the whiplash arrives. Winter brings these sudden, soaking atmospheric rivers that just dump inches of water onto Los Angeles County in a matter of hours.
And the ground can't take it.
No, the baked, contracted soil can't absorb it cleanly at all, so the ground just turns into absolute liquid mush.
I was actually trying to picture the mechanical failure happening underground here. It feels a bit like, it's like trying to stand upright in a slippery mud pit while someone points an industrial fan directly at your chest.
It is a perfect visualization for the mechanics at play. The heavy winter rains flood the gaps that opened up during the summer drought, and water acts as this powerful lubricant on the soil, so the friction that is supposed to hold those shrunken roots in place simply disappears.
And the industrial fan in this scenario would be the Santa Ana winds, right?
Yes. You're talking 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts rolling down from the San Gabriel Mountains. When you apply that kind of lateral force to a lubricated, failing root system,
The tree doesn't stand a chance.
not at all. The guides actually point to specific, fast-growing species common to the area that are highly vulnerable to this, particularly the blue gum eucalyptus and those towering Mexican fan palms.
Oh, I see those everywhere. They shoot up so fast, but I'm guessing their root systems don't grow deep enough to support that kind of height.
Arborists refer to this vulnerability as wind throw. Those species hold almost all of their mass really high up in the canopy.
So they have a very high center of gravity.
Exactly. When a massive gust of wind hits the top of a Mexican fan palm, it creates incredible leverage down at the base. And if that base is sitting in saturated mud, the tree essentially uproots and becomes an unguided projectile.
Which is exactly why we need to talk about spotting the red flags early. Because if the soil and the wind are conspiring to knock these trees down, how do you actually know a tree is failing before it hits the roof?
Right.
I mean, I have a few tall trees in my yard, and they look fine to me.
Well, identifying the hidden signs of failure is really the only way to intervene, and there's a specific sequence of physical warnings you can look for today.
Okay, what's the first one?
The most immediate red flag is a sudden, severe leaning, especially after a heavy rainstorm.
Now wait, if my tree has always had a slight tilt, should I be worried? Because trees don't always grow perfectly straight.
No, you're right. A natural, gradual lean that a tree has developed over decades, usually to reach for sunlight, is usually pretty stable. The tree grows what's called reaction wood to compensate for that angle.
Okay, so what am I looking for?
What you're looking for is a sudden change in the angle. If the tree was standing upright on Tuesday and by Thursday morning it's suddenly tilted 15 degrees toward your driveway, the structural anchor has broken.
I want to pause on that. When you say the structural anchor has broken, what is mechanically failing underground?
It's the failure of the root plate. So imagine a wide, shallow pancake of thick structural roots spreading out in the top 2 feet of soil around the base of the trunk.
Right.
That root plate acts as a massive counterweight. If the tree suddenly leans, it means a section of that root plate has snapped, or it completely lost its grip.
Wow.
At that point, the only thing keeping the tree upright is temporary soil friction, or just a lucky balance.
And I guess that leads to the second major warning sign. The guides mentioned looking for heaving soil, like exposed roots lifting out of the ground at the base.
Yeah, think about the physics of a leaning structure. If the tree is falling forward, the roots on the backside are being pulled violently upward.
Makes sense.
And this tension lifts the dirt with them. It creates this strange mound or a heaving effect on one side of the trunk. If you see roots physically breaking the surface of the lawn, pulling out of the earth.
That tree is actively in the process of uprooting.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're looking at the ground for sudden leans and heaving soil. What about the tree itself?
Well, move your eyes up the main stem. You want to check for deep vertical cracks running up the trunk.
What do those mean?
Those fissures indicate the wood fibers are literally separating under immense stress. And then look up into the upper canopy. You're watching for a large volume of dead, leafless branches, especially when the rest of the tree is clearly alive and green.
The guides morbidly refer to those as widowmakers.
Yeah, and they really earn that name. Dead wood loses its moisture and its natural flexibility. So when the Santa Ana winds sweep through, those dead branches can't bend.
They just snap.
They snap instantly and drop with lethal force.
I had a question about something that always trips me up. Let's say I go out, I check the soil, no heaving,
Yeah.
the trunk looks solid, no vertical cracks, no dead branches. Can I confidently assume my house is safe?
Well, what's fascinating here is that visual inspection only covers the external mechanics. The most deceptive threats are the biological ones occurring inside the tree.
Completely hidden from view.
Completely. Fungal infections, root rot, and pest infestations can hollow out a trunk over a period of years.
So the tree is literally decaying from the inside out while looking perfectly normal on the outside.
Exactly. You might have this massive, beautiful oak tree producing a full canopy of green leaves. But internally, a fungal infection might have turned its core into something resembling wet cardboard.
Oh, wow.
The structural density is just gone. When the wind blows, the outer shell simply crumples.
That is terrifying. And there was another deceptive danger mentioned in the materials that honestly blew my mind. The ivy illusion.
Oh, yes. English and Algerian ivy.
Yes, because ivy looks so incredibly romantic. It creeps up a brick wall, it wraps around a mature oak tree, and it just gives a property this lush, established feel. I would never thought to see it as a hazard.
Yeah, biologically speaking, climbing ivy is a relentless, slow-moving parasite.
Parasite.
It aggressively competes with the host tree for soil nutrients, sunlight, and water. But beyond starving the tree, it creates a massive physical burden. Ivy holds moisture against the bark, which really accelerates that internal fungal rot we just discussed.
But the guide also talks about the physical weight. And I have to push back a little here because we're talking about leaves and thin vines. Yeah. Can ivy really weigh enough to bring down a mature tree?
Well, those thin vines accumulate and multiply over decades. A mature ivy vine system covering a large tree can easily add thousands of pounds of sheer weight to the canopy.
Thousands of pounds.
Imagine using a crane to hoist a compact car into the branches of your oak tree and just leaving it there.
A compact car. That's insane.
And it isn't just the downward gravitational pull. That dense wall of ivy leaves fills in all the natural gaps between the tree's branches. It creates a solid surface area.
So it blocks the wind.
Right. When a storm rolls in, instead of the wind safely blowing through the branches, the ivy catches the wind like a massive ship's sail.
Oh, I see.
The combination of the extra weight and the massive wind resistance is enough to snap healthy trunks and just collapse the entire structure under its own parasitic load.
So let's play this out. I'm a homeowner. I take a walk around my property, and I spot a massive eucalyptus with a sudden lean. I see the heaving soil. Maybe there's a heavy layer of ivy on it.
Okay.
The natural instinct for a lot of people, especially if they consider themselves handy and want to save some money, is to head to the hardware store, buy a chainsaw, and just take care of it themselves.
Yeah, and the guidance on this is unambiguous. Attempting to remove a hazardous mature tree yourself is one of the most dangerous things a homeowner can possibly do.
I read that section and immediately thought, well, just because I can put a chainsaw on my credit card doesn't make me a lumberjack. But what is it that makes it so dangerous? I mean, I cut firewood. I understand how a saw works.
Cutting a log on the ground is entirely different from felling a standing structure. It really comes down to the brutal, unforgiving physics of heavy timber.
How so?
A mature tree holds a tremendous amount of potential energy. When you cut into the trunk, you are initiating a massive transfer of kinetic energy. You're trying to steer thousands of pounds of falling wood.
And if you don't know exactly what you're doing, you can't control where that energy goes.
Exactly. Professionals rely on a highly specific technique called a hinge cut to direct a tree's fall.
Walk me through how a hinge cut actually works mechanically.
So an arborist cuts a wedge, or a face cut, into the side of the trunk facing the desired drop zone. Then they make a back cut on the opposite side.
Okay.
Crucially, they do not cut all the way through. They leave a specific calculated strip of unsevered wood fibers between the two cuts.
Oh, so that strip acts as a literal physical hinge.
Yes. As the tree falls, that wooden hinge bends, controlling the direction and the speed of the descent.
So what happens when a weekend dye-eyer tries to do that and, messes up the math?
If you miscalculate the depth of the cuts or sever the hinge entirely, the tree enters a free fall. It can twist unpredictably off the stump.
Which means you could land on your house.
Or worse, it can trigger what arborists call a barber chair.
A barber chair.
This is when the trunk splits vertically up the middle. The back half of the tree snaps violently backward and upward, often striking the operator with enough blunt force to shatter a jaw or cause a fatal injury before they even register what went wrong.
That is horrifying. And there's another concept the guide mentions that is equally terrifying. The spring pole.
Oh, yes. Spring poles are a massive hazard, particularly during the cleanup phase after a storm has already partially knocked a tree down.
The way it's described, it's when a branch or a smaller sapling gets pinned to the ground underneath the weight of the main trunk.
Right, you have a massive log resting on a bent branch. The wood fibers on the outside of the bend are under immense tension, and the fibers on the inside are under heavy compression.
So it's basically loaded.
That branch has been transformed into a giant wooden spring, fully loaded with stored mechanical energy.
And an amateur sees that branch and thinks, I'll just cut this out of the way to get to the trunk.
And the moment the chainsaw severs those tension fibers, the energy is released instantly. The branch snaps back up with staggering velocity.
There's no time to duck.
None. This is a major reason why OSHA consistently ranks tree care as one of the most hazardous professions in the country.
Because of the fatal strikes?
Fatal strike from falling objects, unpredictable tension releases, and electrocution from obscured power lines in the canopy.
Wow. And beyond the risk to your physical safety, the financial liability of a DIY mistake is ruinous. Let's talk about the insurance angle.
It's important.
Let's say you try to take down a leaning pine, you miscalculate the hinge cut, and you drop a 3-ton branch directly onto your neighbor's roof. No one is hurt, but the property damage is huge. The common assumption is that your homeowner's insurance will just cover the repair.
An insurance company will take a very close look at that claim. They frequently deny claims based on gross negligence.
Really?
Oh, yeah. If an unlicensed, untrained homeowner decides to perform highly hazardous, specialized work without the proper safety equipment, the insurer will argue that you willingly assumed the risk.
That makes sense.
Professional tree care companies carry massive liability policies specifically written to cover the unpredictable nature of timber extraction.
So DIY is completely off the table. Let's say I spot the heaving soil, I recognize the danger, and I call a professional crew. The materials outline professional management, and it sounds less like landscaping and more like a military operation.
It really is an entirely different world from a couple of guys showing up with a pickup truck. Legitimate emergency removal begins with a rapid, scientific risk assessment.
Based on guidelines from the International Society of Arboriculture, right?
Yes. A certified arborist will evaluate the site meticulously.
What are they actually looking for during that assessment? Are they just deciding where to make the cut?
Oh no, they're calculating dozens of variables. They map out the proximity to high voltage lines, they calculate the drop zones to ensure zero impact on surrounding structures.
And the tree itself.
Crucially, they test the structural integrity of the wood to make sure the tree won't simply shatter when they apply rigging tension to it.
Wait, how do they test if the inside is hollow, like we talked about earlier?
They might use a specialized sounding mallet to tap the trunk, listening for the acoustic difference between solid wood and a decayed core.
That's fascinating.
In more complex cases, they use resistance drilling devices that measure the density of the wood deep inside the trunk. They have to know what they are attaching their ropes to.
Because the actual extraction is incredibly technical. I mean, in a densely packed suburban neighborhood in El Monte, you rarely have the space to just yell, "timber," and drop a massive eucalyptus across a lawn.
Space is almost always restricted, so the crew has to dismantle the canopy vertically, piecing it down from the top.
The guide describes this process, and the rigging is it's a technical ballet. Arborists use bucket trucks or heavy-duty cranes, but the rope work is what really caught my attention.
The friction devices.
Yes, they use specialized friction devices. They'll cut off a limb weighing hundreds of pounds high up in the canopy, but instead of letting it free fall onto your driveway, the rope catches it. The ground crew uses a metal friction cylinder strapped to the base of the trunk to slowly, deliberately lower that massive weight to the ground. It's this incredible blend of raw horsepower and delicate geometry.
It is highly calculated load management. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, while emergency extractions are impressive, the core philosophy of professional tree management is to avoid emergencies in the first place.
Right.
The most effective way to handle tree hazards is through proactive prevention.
So, routine pruning.
Proactive maintenance is a controlled environment. Waiting for a storm to partially uproot a tree guarantees a chaotic, high-risk emergency response.
Pruning makes intuitive sense, right?
Yeah.
You're removing the dead widowmakers before they snap. But the guide explains that proper pruning does something much more important for the tree's survival during a storm. It fundamentally changes how the tree interacts with the wind.
Exactly. It reduces the wind resistance of the entire structure. If a canopy is too dense or choked with the ivy we discussed, it acts as a giant sail.
Catching all that wind.
Yes. When those 50-mile-per-hour Santa Ana gusts hit, that dense sail captures the wind and transfers all that lateral force straight down the trunk into the root system.
So by selectively thinning the canopy, the arborists are opening up channels for the wind to flow safely through the branches. You're turning a solid sail back into a porous net.
That's a great way to put it. The wind force dissipates rather than turning the tree into a lever against its own roots.
Let's get down to the logistics for you, the homeowner listening to this. Say we've convinced you to call the pros to thin out your heavy trees or remove a leaning hazard. What are the practical realities here? I want to talk about costs, because that's usually the biggest hurdle.
Well, the guides know that emergency tree removal in the El Monte area generally ranges from $800 to over $3,000.
$3,000 is a significant expense. Why the massive variance?
The price is entirely dependent on complexity and urgency. If a tree is relatively accessible, the cost is lower.
Okay, that makes sense.
But if a crew has to mobilize a heavy crane, navigate around active power lines, or dispatch a team at midnight because a pine tree is resting against your gutters, you are paying a premium for that specialized, immediate response.
It sounds painful to pay that out of pocket. And the insurance reality is a bit frustrating here, honestly. Homeowners insurance usually covers the damage if a healthy tree is blown over onto a covered structure during a storm, but they rarely, if ever, pay for the proactive removal of a dangerous tree before it falls.
It seems counterintuitive that they won't pay to prevent the disaster.
Totally.
But you have to view that out-of-pocket cost as an investment in risk mitigation. You are paying to save yourself a massive insurance deductible, months of disruptive roof repairs, and the potential for a catastrophic injury.
Absolutely. There is also the issue of municipal red tape, because even if it's on your property, you often can't just cut down whatever you want.
Oh, definitely. The city of El Monte, similar to many municipalities across California, has strict regulations regarding tree removal. You typically need to secure permits to remove mature straight trees or specific protected species.
So you can't just wing it?
No, attempting to bypass the city can result in heavy fines. An established professional service handles that permitting process for you, ensuring the removal is legally compliant.
We've covered a tremendous amount of ground here. We started with the extreme weather cycles that degrade soil friction. We walked through the physical red flags like sudden leans and heaving roots.
Right.
We looked at the physics of why DIY felling is a literal death trap. And we broke down the mechanics of professional risk assessment and removal.
Right.
So What does this all mean? The takeaway seems to be that ignoring a warning sign is a gamble you will eventually lose.
Gravity always wins.
Yeah, proactive care is manageable. Emergency extraction is chaos.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought from these materials that often goes entirely overlooked. We have spent this entire time talking about the canopy, the trunk, and the branches, but removing the visible hazard is really only half the battle.
Wait, you're talking about what's left behind? The stump.
Yes. Property owners frequently view a leftover stump as just a minor aesthetic annoyance. They opt to leave it in the ground to save a few dollars on the final bill, assuming nature will just rot it away.
And it won't.
Well, nature will rot it away, but that process takes years. And during that decay, the stump transforms into a highly active biological threat.
It becomes a breeding ground.
Exactly. It acts as a massive decaying food source that attracts termites, carpenter ants, and aggressive fungal infections. And those pests and diseases don't just stay in the stump. They use it as a bridgehead to spread into the healthy trees, the surrounding landscaping, and eventually the structural wood of your home. It creates a cascading liability for your entire property.
Man, it is a brilliant reminder that comprehensive property management doesn't stop when the chainsaw is turned off. It requires managing the environment all the way below the soil line.
I want to encourage you to take a walk around your yard today. Look at your trees with this new understanding of the physics and the biology at play. Check the soil for heaving, examine those trunks for cracks, and please don't ignore that dense ivy. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay vigilant, take care of your property, and remember, you never want to hear that crack, snap, crash.